If you own your home, take a moment and picture something with me. Imagine spending 30 years paying a mortgage, 30 years of writing that same check every month, 30 years of choosing responsibility over comfort, putting money toward a house instead of vacations, luxuries, or easier choices. You watch the balance slowly shrink year after year until one day the letter finally arrives from the bank. The letter every homeowner dreams about. Mortgage paid in full. In that moment, the house is truly yours. No lender, no debt hanging over your head. Just your name on the deed and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you finished what you started. For most people, that moment feels like the end of the long financial struggle. The day their home finally becomes untouchable. But for one homeowner in Michigan, and that sense of security turned out to be an illusion. Years after paying off his home, something unexpected happened. He lost it. Not to a bank, not to a scammer, not to a reckless investment. He lost it to something far smaller and far more frightening than anyone would imagine. $2,400 in unpaid property taxes. Frank Sullivan was 68 years old. He had spent most of his life working as a machine operator in Detroit. Not glamorous work, but steady, honest. The kind of job that slowly built a life. Frank and his wife bought their small brick house in 1989. 3 bedrooms, a modest yard, a quiet street where neighbors knew each other. They raised 2 kids there. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, backyard barbecues. Everything that makes a house feel like more than walls and a roof. For decades. And the mortgage payment was simply part of life. It came every month, just like electricity, just like groceries, just like insurance. But eventually, after 30 years of steady payments, the mortgage ended. Frank paid off the house when he turned 63. He remembers opening the final statement, the one that said, balance $0. That moment felt like crossing a finish line. For the first time in his adult life, Frank believed the house truly belonged to him, and in many ways it did. But there was one small detail he didn't fully understand. Owning a home outright does not mean the bills stop. Every homeowner knows about property taxes, but most people treat them like background noise, a yearly bill, a small obligation, often paid automatically through a mortgage escrow account. When Frank had a mortgage, the bank handled those payments. The taxes were bundled into his monthly mortgage bill. He never had to think about them. But once the mortgage ended, that system disappeared. Now the tax bill arrived directly in his mailbox. At first, it wasn't a problem. The amount was manageable. Frank paid it, year after year. But retirement changed the math. Frank retired at 65. His income dropped overnight. Instead of a paycheck, he now relied on Social Security, a small pension, and modest savings. At first, everything seemed fine. The house was paid off. No rent, no mortgage, just utilities, groceries, and normal living expenses. But then inflation crept in. Groceries became more expensive. Medical costs increased. Car repairs arrived at inconvenient moments. And slowly, Frank's financial margin began to shrink. Not dramatically, just enough to make decisions harder. One year, the property tax bill arrived during a difficult month. Frank had just replaced his water heater. Then his car needed new brakes. Money felt tight. The tax bill that year was about $2,400. Frank made a simple decision. He would delay it, just until things stabilized. He told himself, I'll catch up next month. But next month brought another expense, and another. Months passed. The tax bill remained unpaid. Local governments take property taxes seriously because those taxes fund schools, roads, police, and fire departments. When a tax payment is missed, the process doesn't stop. It begins. The first letter arrived quietly, a reminder notice. Frank set it aside. Then came a second letter. This one mentioned penalty. Frank told himself he would take care of it soon. Would he? But the months kept moving, and the unpaid balance slowly grew. Late fees, interest, administrative charges. Eventually, the county sent a more serious notice. It explained that if the taxes remained unpaid, the property could enter tax foreclosure. Frank didn't fully grasp what that meant. To him, foreclosure was something banks did, something that happened when people failed to pay their mortgage. But his mortgage was gone. The house was paid off. How could anyone take a house that had no loan attached to it? That assumption, the belief that a paid-off home cannot be lost, is what traps many homeowners. Because property taxes operate under a different rule. Property taxes are not optional. They are legally tied to the land itself. If they go unpaid long enough, the government has the authority to seize the property to recover the debt. And this process is known as tax foreclosure. And unlike mortgage foreclosure, it can move surprisingly fast in some states. For Frank, the unpaid balance eventually crossed a legal threshold. The county moved forward with the foreclosure process. The final notice arrived nearly 2 years after the first missed payment. It stated that the property would be auctioned if the taxes were not paid in full. Frank finally realized the seriousness of the situation, but by then the balance had grown. The original $2,400 had grown to more than $4,000 due to penalties and legal costs. Frank scrambled to gather the money, but retirement income doesn't move quickly. And before he could resolve it, the legal deadline passed. Tax foreclosures often end in public auctions. Yet investors attend these auctions looking for properties they can purchase cheaply. For them, it's a business opportunity. For the homeowner involved, it can be devastating. Frank's house, the one he had spent 30 years paying for, appeared on an auction list. The starting bid was set slightly above the unpaid taxes and fees. Within minutes, the property sold. The winning bid was $350,000. Frank had lost a house worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over a tax debt that started at $2,400. The hardest part wasn't just the financial loss, it was the disbelief. Frank kept repeating the same sentence to friends. "I paid that house off." In his mind, ownership meant security, but property law doesn't see it that way. Even a fully paid home still carries obligations, and property taxes are one of the most powerful. Stories like Frank's are not isolated incidents. Across the United States, thousands of properties enter tax foreclosure every year. Many of the owners are retirees, people living on fixed incomes, people who believed their homes were safe once the mortgage ended. But rising taxes, missed notices, or simple financial strain can start a chain reaction. And once that chain reaction reaches the foreclosure stage, stopping it becomes difficult. Frank's story is not about irresponsibility. He worked his entire life. He paid his mortgage faithfully. He didn't gamble or take reckless risks. The problem wasn't his character, it was the math. Small debts can become dangerous when attached to valuable assets. A few $1,000s of tax debt can legally trigger the loss of a home worth hundreds of thousands. If you own property, 3 things matter more than many people realize. First, property taxes never disappear. Even when the mortgage ends, the tax obligation remains. Second, missed payments trigger a legal process that continues whether you respond or not. Third, once foreclosure reaches the auction stage, reclaiming the property becomes extremely difficult. Understanding these rules early can prevent devastating outcomes later. If you own your home today, ask yourself a simple question. Do you know exactly when your property taxes are due? And do you have a system in place to ensure they are always paid? Because unlike many other bills, property taxes can have consequences that go far beyond the amount owed. After the foreclosure, Hunter Frank moved into a small apartment. The house where his children grew up now belongs to someone else. The yard where he once hosted family barbecues belongs to a new owner. The loss still feels unreal to him, but he now shares his story with anyone who will listen. Not because he wants sympathy, but because he wants other homeowners to understand something he learned too late. Owning a house outright does not mean the financial responsibilities disappear. If your home is paid off, congratulations. That is an achievement many people spend decades chasing. But remember something important. A paid-off home still sits inside a legal system that requires ongoing obligations. Taxes, insurance, maintenance. Ignoring those obligations, even briefly, can trigger consequences far larger than the original bill. Torthor Frank Sullivan lost a $350,000 house over $2,400 in property taxes. Not because he didn't work hard, not because he didn't care, but because a small financial obligation quietly grew into a legal crisis. And sometimes the most dangerous financial problems aren't the biggest ones. They are the small ones that seem harmless until the system starts moving. If you found this story valuable, share it with someone who owns a home. Because sometimes the difference between keeping a house and losing it is simply understanding the rules before they catch you by surprise. And if you want more real stories about money, property, and financial protection, subscribe. Because the next story might help you protect something that matters even more.